Chapter 8 of The Wise Heart by Jack Kornfield. This Precious Human Body. Within this fathom-long body and mind is found all of the teachings. In your investigation of the world, never allow the mind to desert the body. Examine its nature, see the elements that comprise it. When its true nature is seen fully and lucidly by the heart, the wonders of the world will become clear. One of the magical experiences in Buddhist training is our growing ability to quiet the mind and sense the body and the world anew. Zen poets celebrate the crunch of snow on the winter path, spring blossoms covering their robes, wind among the pines, walking wet in the autumn mist, listening to the laughter of children. In the forest monasteries of Asia and on retreat in America, practitioners eat unhurriedly in silence. With mindfulness, we truly taste the pear, the cheddar, the orange, and the warm bread. We learn to walk unhurriedly again and notice the touch of breeze on our skin, the sound of birds, the rhythmic swinging of our gait, the ground beneath our feet. Like the solitary prisoner who, after long months of aloneness, has learned to savor the presence of a visiting ant, the smallest details of life appear vibrant and delightful. Both Buddhist psychology and Western psychology have championed the need to include the body as part of a wise psychology. Freud and his followers, such as Jung and Reich, engaged in a hard-won battle to help us re-inhabit our body as the conduit of life energy. Through their work, we have learned the value of our instincts, the eloquence of our sexuality, the need to respect the root motivations and drives of physical life. This reclaiming of bodily life is part of a long and continuing struggle. The repressive Victorian society that Freud found so entrenched and unhealthy was built on centuries of denial. The Western heritage of Neoplatonism and medieval Christianity had devalued the physical and the instinctive in favor of the spiritual and the rational. For centuries, certain fearful and ascetic fathers of Christianity had celebrated mortification of the flesh as essential to avoiding sin. And now, in its own way, we can see how technological society ignores the wisdom of the body. In modern life, the body becomes a machine for living, the subject of managed care, of steroids and plastic surgery. Our flesh is mortified in new forms as we sit in traffic jams, work in cramped cubicles and at school desks under artificial light, and distract ourselves with fast food and video games. Too many of our children are raised by TV instead of by the communal holding and storytelling that was our human heritage for thousands of years. We have lost our connection to our own natural instinctive life. Unfortunately, when we ignore the body, it makes itself known through the medium of various symptoms. Without a healthy physical connection, we experience loss of vitality, chronic pain, and stress-related diseases. We suffer from ulcers and colitis, high blood pressure, and strokes. We experience anorexia and obesity, depression and anxiety, road rage, and addiction. Too many of us are lost, like James Joyce's character, Mr. Duffy, who lived a short distance from his body. In New York, the Associated Press reported that the well-dressed body of a 41-year-old man who had died during the morning commute had ridden the crowded subways for a whole day before anyone noticed. Unlike the unobservant subway riders, at Ajahn Chah's monastery, we monks deliberately sat with corpses. We did so to see the fleeting nature of the body, but even more, we did so to fully value the gift of the body while it is alive. In the Buddhist way of understanding, our human body is considered exceedingly precious because it provides the necessary conditions to realize freedom and true happiness. We begin with a systematic training of mindfulness of the body. In sitting and walking, in eating and moving, we cultivate mindfulness. We develop the ability to come into life of the body. We notice suffering or well-being arising in our body. We discover how our body responds when our mind is clear or confused, when our heart is open or closed. We learn to hold the mystery of bodily life with respect. Here is an eighth principle of Buddhist psychology. Mindfulness of the body allows us to live fully. It brings healing, wisdom, and freedom. When James came to Buddhist practice, he suffered from high blood pressure and heart palpitations. A harried business owner and father of 2 middle school children, he shared custody and parenting responsibility with his ex-wife. He hoped that meditation might help to reduce his level of stress. Beyond this, he was interested in enlightenment because his readings in Zen told him that this would solve his problems. He envisioned enlightenment as a blissful state that, once attained, would allow him to transcend the mundane difficulties of his life. To his surprise, his Buddhist training began with detailed attention to the breath and body. He was disappointed that the focus was not on gaining enlightenment. It was on the here and now. As he practiced in this simple way, James saw how much he thought about the future, how tightly he held his body, how driven his life was. His family history was one of achievement in school, sports, and work. His ambitious parents and strict coaches had all forced him to keep striving. Now he drove himself and pushed his children. Once James began to acknowledge his level of tension and restlessness, he was instructed to pay careful attention to the moments when he did not feel driven. With mindfulness, he began to notice these gaps, to acquaint himself with the experience of non-striving. An unfamiliar state arose, an uncomfortable, empty feeling that he had always avoided. Encouraged to pay even clearer attention, James discovered that the unfamiliar emptiness contained contentment. For the first time in years, he felt moments of being at ease, at home in his own body. He was beginning to taste enlightenment. In my own case, it was in the forest monastery of Ajahn Chah that I began to taste the beauty of embodied life. I remember how vividly mindfulness practice awakened my senses. I grew up in a suburban intellectual family, and the outdoors meant the backyard and maybe the camping store in the mall. Even in college, my outdoor experiences consisted mostly of moving between the library and the student center. But in the monastery, the temple buildings were in a central clearing, surrounded by towering teak trees and tropical vines, by thick woods filled with wild birds and cobras. Our small huts were scattered throughout this forest. In this forest, I learned to feel the turning of the seasons, the sweaty robes and loud singing of the cicadas on hot summer nights, the muddy feet and endless dampness of the monsoon rains, the dry winds of the cool season when I would wrap my towel under my robe for an extra layer of warmth. This was the first time I could actually watch the slowly changing phases of the moon and the appearance of morning and evening planets at dawn and dusk. Every day we drew water from wells to wash and drink and bathe. I learned to share my hut with a menagerie of insects, to be mindful of not stepping on the trails of exquisitely painful fire ants, to see the tiny chicks of wild forest game hens. I began to discover the organic rhythms of my own body. I would stay up late into the night to meditate and then rest in the late morning. At first, I ate too much because I was afraid of being hungry after our one meal of the day. Later, I learned not to follow my fears and eat just what my body needed. When my physical pains grew strong, I learned to work with them. The Thai villagers were accustomed to sitting for hours cross-legged with no cushion on the dirt and stone floors of the temple, but I was a stiff American used to a chair. My back and bottom and knees ached. Some of the meditation periods were like slow torture. I learned the art of softening, relaxing around the pain, inviting my body to accommodate strong sensations. Ajahn Chah repeatedly highlighted the difference between the pains that inevitably come in life and the suffering we create around the pain. It is really helpful to learn how to work with pain because at certain times we will all experience it. Last year, Malik, a man with a progressive form of rheumatoid arthritis, came to a practice at a retreat. He had done all he could medically for himself, but he was still frustrated and angry. We worked together as he learned to soften the anger and aversion around the pain, to breathe and hold his body, even the contractions, with kind attention. He used the traditional image of a parent holding and protecting a crying child. Equally important, Malik had to learn to relax his judgments, his frustration and anger and self-pity. He learned compassion practice for himself and extended it to all those whose bodies are in pain. Gradually, Malik's physical pain and frustration became more workable. He discovered how to honor his crippled body with a tender attention. He recognized the lesson Anne Morrow Lindbergh discovered during the birth of her child. Go with the pain. Let it take you. Open your palms and your body to the pain. It comes in waves like a tide, and you must be open as a vessel lying on the beach, letting it fill you up and then retreating, leaving you empty and clear. With a deep breath, it has to be as deep as the pain. One reaches a kind of inner freedom from pain, as though the pain were not yours but your body's. The spirit lays the body on the altar. Guiding the heart back to the body. There is no reality except the one contained within us. That is why so many people live such an unreal life. They take the images outside them for reality and never allow the world within the body and mind to reveal itself. For Katie, a young woman who had been abducted and raped, mindfulness of the body was a delicate and painful journey. She came to a month-long meditation retreat to heal her trauma and find some inner peace. At first, the intensity of her painful memories kept her completely out of her body. Then, with a tender-hearted attention, Katie found that she could feel her feet when she walked. But sitting was too stressful for her. She had been tied up, and the immobility was too similar to her abduction. So instead of sitting practice, she walked and walked, learning to fully feel her feet on the earth, her legs, and her movement. Next, she used her breath as she walked to breathe compassion into the rigidity and terror, into the tension in her shoulders, arms, and torso. Periodically, waves of fear, rage, and grief washed over her, and she had to rest. Sometimes she would reestablish a sense of well-being by holding onto a tree or feeling her feet touching the earth. When Katie felt stronger, she began to sit, immobilized as she called it, and little by little allow the memories of ropes and panic to arise. To support this practice, we sat together often, establishing a trusting field of compassion that could allow for her healing. Guiding her attention with kindness, she began to feel all the sensations she had avoided for so long. Her body wept and shook. Then she slowly opened to the feelings and images. By taking it a little at a time, she was gradually able to tolerate and release more and more of the memory. After several weeks of practice, she relaxed her grip on the story. Her experience became just sensation, just feelings, just a memory. She realized with relief that her abduction was not present anymore. All that was present was sensations, thoughts, feeling, and spacious release. Katie began to feel free. When we struggle with confusion, fear, ambition, depression, or loss, Buddhist psychology asks us to sense how we experience this in our body. A man whose marriage ended badly became aware of the boulder of grief that weighed upon his heart. A woman who was in remission from breast cancer found the fear of death in her tight chest and constricted breathing. Another man who had worked for years to build a business and family faced a huge hole of emptiness in his abdomen when his business was sold and his children left for college. Like Katie's, sometimes our suffering and psychic disturbance are so great that we cannot sit to meditate or hold the body still. Then trainings in movement, such as walking meditation and yoga, or mindful practices of sweeping the floor and preparing food, are used to settle the mind. On retreat, we may suggest that a troubled student spend time working in the meditation center garden. Many people have come back to life through patiently tending the plants and digging in the earth. Such practices help to ground the fragmented mind in the body. For an extreme case, I remember an old Tibetan Lama in India who asked a profoundly disturbed student to offer 100,000 full prostrations to the Buddha as a way to settle his fractured psyche. It took the student a whole year, and it helped. Then the Lama had him do it twice again, adding a compassion practice as well. After 3 years, the man's inner well-being was remarkably restored. One of the first jobs I had when I returned to America from Ajahn Chah's monastery was as an aide on the acute ward of a large mental hospital. I enthusiastically told my coworkers about Buddhist mindfulness meditation, and they wondered if it could be helpful to the patients. But after a short while, it became apparent to me that closing their eyes to meditate was not what most of these patients needed. They were already lost in their minds. The practices they needed required embodiment. Walking meditation, yoga, tai chi, gardening. They needed to ground themselves back on the earth. Then I realized that there was indeed a large population in the hospital that was desperately in need of meditation. The stressed out psychologists, social workers, nurses, psychiatrists, and aides. For them, mindfulness could offer both personal well-being and greater effectiveness in their work. I volunteered to teach a class in mindfulness meditation for the hospital staff. A number of them came and told me that learning a systematic way to calm their minds and tend to their tired bodies was enormously helpful. I'm sure it helped the patients too. Because our human body is considered precious in Buddhist psychology, no matter what the phase of our life, we are instructed to value and care for it. When physical illness arises, it often diminishes our sense of dignity. With this can also come shame and self-hatred. We can take the illness personally, as if it is our fault. But sickness and health are a part of every human life. When our hearts open with understanding, we will treat this very body and mind with kindness, no matter what the circumstances. I watched a renowned Burmese master, Tengpulu Sayadaw, guide a very sick student on one of our annual 3-month retreats. Don was a 41-year-old man with metastatic brain cancer, whose doctor had given up after treating him without success. The swelling of his head from the tumors was visible, and it appeared that he had only a short while to live. I took him for a special interview with Tengpulu Sayadaw, expecting the master to give him the practices for conscious death that Buddhist tradition believes to be important, but that was not his response at all. Tengpulu listened to Don's history and then placed his hands on the tumors to offer direct healing. He stated that human birth is precious and that Don must do everything he could to heal himself. The master chanted for a time to create special healing water for Don to drink, and then gave him sacred prayers to recite and extensive healing visualizations. You must try to heal yourself and live as long as possible, because this human body is the most valuable source of spiritual learning of all forms of birth. Drink this water and practice these meditations and heal with your whole heart. And then only if this fails and you know you are dying is it time to switch to the death practices. Don't die yet. And although Don did not heal completely, when Tengpulu's encouragement, he lived for years longer than the doctors had predicted. Through the body to the deathless. Just as consciousness mysteriously mirrors the dual wave and particle nature of light, our own body is a realm of contradiction. Carl Jung reminds us to respect the original animal nature of our body, but then he continues, the body is also connected with the highest form of the spirit. He insists that we can bloom only when spirit and instinct are in harmony. Too much animal disfigures the civilized human being. Too much culture makes for a sick animal. For wisdom and nobility to flower, there has to be a balance that includes both embodied life and the universal perspective. Because modern American culture fosters an intense identification with the outer appearance of the body, going beyond it is not easy. We devote enormous amounts of time to how we look, to dressing, adorning, and strengthening the body, yet no matter how we cling as we age, the body betrays us. If we limit ourselves to the fulfillment of bodily desires and believe that the body is who we are, when we face age, sickness, difficulties, and death, we will be lost and frightened. Ajahn Chah explains, we only rent this house. If it belonged to us, we could tell it not to get sick, not to grow old. But it takes no notice of these wishes. With wisdom, if you live, that's good, and when you have to die, that's fine too. If the doctors told me I had cancer and was going to die in a few months, I'd remind the doctors, watch out, because death is coming to get you too. It's just a question of who goes first. Buddhist psychology offers dozens of trainings to see our body from the universal perspective. There are meditations that allow us to sense our body as a vibrating energy field or as a network of chakras and energy centers. There are practices for sensing the body as an anatomical system of flesh and bone, fluids and solids. Using these practices in one monastery, we would focus on sensing our own skeleton. When we were instructed to take our bones for a walk, we also looked at the skeletons of others walking by. This immediately snapped us out of our stories and melodramas and shifted our whole identity. In another important training, we can learn to experience the body as 4 primary elements and 24 other derived elementary properties. Buddhist psychology describes our physical existence with the basic elements of earth, air, fire, and water. This is much like traditional systems of psychology and medicine in the ancient Greek, Chinese, African, or Native American societies. Modern readers can mistakenly believe this to be a primitive version of our periodic table of the elements, but actually, these 4 elements are a description of how we directly experience the body. If you close your eyes and feel carefully, you won't feel a body. Body is only a word, the idea or concept level. What you will actually feel are areas of hardness and softness, of pressure, heaviness, and textures such as rough and smooth. This is the earth element. You will also feel areas of warmth and coolness. This is the fire or temperature element. You will feel areas of vibrations and stillness. This is the air or vibratory element. And you will feel cohesion and fluidity. This is the water element. You only need to blink your eyes or swallow to sense it. We know our body most directly this way. We also know it through the secondary elements of color, sound, air element at the ear, odor, and taste. A direct investigation of these bodily elements can free us from deep layers of identification and entanglement. This can happen simply as it did for Mike, a student who was obsessed by clearly irrational thoughts of jealousy. As Mike spoke to me, his rational mind knew that his tormenting thoughts had no basis in the reality of his relationship. He had tried to let them go, but he kept getting caught in their story. Sitting with him, I asked Mike to allow the jealous thoughts to be present and to notice where he sensed them in his body. He became aware of strong sensations of heat and contraction in his chest, and then of aversion and fear as he felt the sensations directly. He noticed how his obsessive thoughts quieted when he felt the strong sensations and emotions under them. But Mike said that he couldn't understand the connection between the jealousy and the sensations in his chest. So I invited Mike to notice each of the elements carefully. I asked about the earth element. Did this area of his chest feel hard or soft, dense, smooth, heavy, or light? What about the fire element? Did it feel warm, cool, or neutral? The air element of motion, was the area vibrating or was it still? And the secondary elements of color and scent. If this area of his chest had a color or a scent, what would be present? He discovered the sensations in his chest were hard and rough-textured, pulsating, somewhat hot and black in color. Then I asked Mike to notice whatever feelings and images associated with these elemental sensations were present. He noticed fear arising and feelings of abandonment. Then came a rush of memories of his parents' divorce when he was 7. He remembered the worst part, the day when his mother moved out. He told the whole story and wept. As he sat, holding these experiences with mindfulness, Mike was gradually learning to tolerate the loss, the emptiness, the abandonment that he had carried unconsciously in his body and mind. Mike worked with the feelings of grief, anger, loss, and fear for a long time. He began to recognize the repeated patterns of abandonment in his life. Now, as he remembered himself as a lost 7-year-old boy, he felt a wave of kindness arise. After some time, I invited him to broaden this compassion, to open to the pain of every child of divorce, of every abandoned human being. In this way, he came to know both the personal and the universal nature of his suffering. His experience gradually became more impersonal. He was not just this injured being. He was the adult who was in meditation. He was the whole stream of his history. He was the consciousness witnessing it all. The elemental life of the body. The elements of our body can become a gateway to the hidden stories and unconscious patterns we carry. As we move through this gate, we can sense the play of incarnation in a larger, more universal context. We can feel the elements of life moving in us, our experiences of being shaken, rigid, trembling, weighted down, floating, flexible, grounded, clouded or clear, or all the play of the elements. Our stubborn stance and light-hearted dancings are the earth moving in our body. Our griefs are the water element, the ocean of tears. Our yawn and our songs are the octaves of the air. At one time you were a mountain, you were a cloud, writes Thich Nhat Hanh. This is not poetry, this is science. Meditating on the elements is also used to understand death. This is among the most life-changing contemplations. In the West, we resist reflecting on aging and death because dying is held as failure and it frightens us. In the Buddhist approach, we deliberately turn to face death so that it can bring wisdom, perspective, and a motivation to live each day fully and well. Tibetan master Kalu Rinpoche gave this powerful description of how the elements dissolve as we die. He recommended we contemplate this carefully so that we can shift our identity from the body to the consciousness that is our true nature. As you read these graphic words about the process of dying, notice how the sense of yourself changes. As we near death, the earth element begins to dissolve. We lose our strength. We cannot sit or hold anything up. Our cheeks become sunken. We can no longer support our head. It becomes hard to open and close our eyes. Pallor sets in. We feel heavy and uncomfortable in any position. We ask to be pulled up. Some texts say we feel as though we are falling or sinking underground or being crushed by a great weight, even as if a mountain were pressing down on our body. The earth element is returning to earth. The water element is next. We begin to lose control of our bodily fluids. Our nose begins to run and we dribble. There can be a discharge from the eyes, and maybe we become incontinent. We cannot move our tongue. Our eyes start to feel dry in their sockets. Our lips are drawn and bloodless, our mouth and throat sticky and clogged. The nostrils cave in and we become very thirsty. We tremble and twitch. Some texts say that we feel as if we were drowning in an ocean or being swept away by a huge river. The water element is returning to water. The fire element is next. Our mouth and nose dry up completely. All the warmth of our body begins to seep away, usually from the feet and hands toward the heart. Perhaps a steamy heat rises from the crown of our head. Our breath is cold as it passes through our mouth and nose. We no longer have the warmth to digest anything. It becomes more and more difficult to perceive anything outside of us. The inner experience is of being consumed in a flame or a roaring blaze, or of the world being consumed in a holocaust of fire. The fire element is returning to fire. The air element follows. It becomes harder and harder to breathe. The in-breaths become shallow and the out-breaths longer. We begin to rasp and pant. Our breaths become short and labored. Our body twitches and then becomes still. Our vision fades in and out, blurry and unclear. The inner experience is of a great wind sweeping away the world, a maelstrom of wind consuming the whole universe. The air element is returning to air. As we visualize the dissolution of the elements, death becomes vivid. We are shaken awake and brought to feel the tentativeness of this incarnation. We are drawn to live more wisely. At the same time, the dissolution of the elements at death makes it clear that this body is not our true nature. Attention to this human body brings healing and regeneration. Then the universal practices shift consciousness to a spaciousness witnessing beyond the body. Through awareness of the body, we remember who we really are. Practice, walking meditation. One of the most useful and grounding ways of attending to our body is the practice of walking meditation. Walking meditation is a simple and universal practice for developing calm connectedness and embodied awareness. It can be practiced regularly before or after sitting meditation or any time on its own, such as after a busy day at work or on a lazy Sunday morning. To practice, select a quiet place where you can walk comfortably back and forth, indoors or out, about 10 to 30 paces in length. Begin by standing at one end of this walking path with your feet firmly planted on the ground. Let your hands rest easily wherever they are comfortable. Take a few deep breaths and then open your senses to see and feel the whole surroundings. After a minute, bring your attention back to focus on the body. Center yourself and feel how your body is standing on the earth. Feel the pressure on the bottoms of your feet and the other natural sensations of standing. Let yourself be present and alert. Begin to walk a bit more slowly than usual. Let yourself walk with a sense of ease and dignity. Relax and let your walking be gracious and natural, as if you were a king or queen out for a royal stroll. Pay attention to your body. With each step, feel the sensations of lifting your foot and leg off the earth. Then mindfully place your foot back down. Feel each step fully as you walk. When you reach the end of your path, pause for a moment. Center yourself, carefully turn around, and pause again so that you can be aware of the first step as you walk back. You can experiment with the speed, walking at whatever pace keeps you most present. Continue to walk back and forth with mindfulness for 10 or 20 minutes or longer. As with the breath in sitting, your attention will wander away many times. As soon as you notice this, acknowledge softly where it went, wandering, thinking, hearing, planning. Then return to feel the next step. As with training a puppy, you will come back 1,000 times. Whether you have been away for 1 second or for 10 minutes, no matter. Simply acknowledge where you have been, relax, and come back to being alive here and now with the next step you take. Use this walking meditation to calm and collect yourself and to live more wakefully in your body. Practice at home first. You can then extend your mindful walking in an informal way when you go shopping, when you walk down the street, or walk to or from your car. You can learn to enjoy walking for its own sake, instead of being lost in planning and thinking. In this simple way, you can be truly present, bringing your body, heart, and mind together as you move through your life.